Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now by Professor Mohammad Marandi, who teaches at Tehran University. From Washington, D.C. is Adam Weinstein. He's a policy associate at the National Iranian American Council. And also in Washington, D.C. is Alex Titus. He's a conservative political activist and a policy advisor at American First Policies. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Mohammad Marandi, a terrible attack, 29 killed, more than 50 injured.
Thank you.
It seemed to be a major shock, not only to the establishment, but to the Iranian people. Just help me, first of all, before we get into who did it and what the ramifications are, tell me how much it affected the Iranian people.
Well, it was very upsetting because it was a commemoration for the anniversary of the war in which Saddam Hussein attacked Iran. And it was a public gathering. Children were there, adults were there, people, children had balloons. It was a time for people to enjoy themselves. And the sudden attack was carried out, and a lot of young people died, conscript soldiers, 4-year-old child, a person who was injured in the war, an old gentleman who was a part of the parade, and he was also killed. So it had a major impact in Iran. There was a national day of mourning a couple of days ago. So the impact was pretty severe.
And Mr. Marandi, I know civilians were killed, including a child. What we heard from the Arab Freedom Movement of Al-Ahvaz, who claimed responsibility, they said, quote, "The operation was part of our legitimate resistance and no ordinary civilian was targeted." Would you take them at their word that it was, first of all, it was them and that they were not targeting civilians and that they have a legitimate cause?
No, they don't have a legitimate cause. The Al-Ahwaziyya group was funded by Saddam Hussein during the Iran-Iraq War under a different name at that time. And they were basically mercenaries for the Saddam Hussein military machine. And the resistance in that area was, during the first months of the war, was actually by the indigenous population, which is both Arab and Persian. They fought off the initial onslaught. And we saw in the funeral that hundreds of thousands of people in Ahwaz, almost the whole city, participated in the funerals. So, as you pointed out, ordinary people were killed. And after Saddam Hussein fell, they shifted towards Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. And they took responsibility on a Saudi-funded channel called Iran International a few hours after the attack. So they get support from Saudi Arabia. Before they got support for Saddam Hussein, they killed ordinary people. The turnout for the funeral was extraordinary in Ahwaz. So, no, I don't think that they have any legitimate argument to make.
And before I bring in our guest from the United States, very finally, as we look at the immediate response, and we've got the UN General Assembly happening, we've had Ayatollah Khamenei talking about Saudi and the UAE being behind them and saying they were paid by them. We have the Foreign Minister Javad Zarif saying they were paid by their US masters or coordinated by their US masters, and they were terrorists recruited, trained, armed, and paid by foreign powers. Isn't that a little bit reckless, given that we don't really know?
Well, first of all, the Saudi Crown Prince last year, Mohammed bin Salman, said we have to take the war into Iran. And soon after that, we had an ISIS attack in Tehran. Then, right after this attack, the advisor to the UAE Crown Prince said that this was not a terrorist attack. A decision has been made to carry out attacks deeper inside Iran, and the future attacks will be even larger. So these are officials from these two countries that have made these comments. And on the other hand, the spokesperson who took responsibility soon after the attack, he was welcomed on that TV channel by the host. So there is a lot, intelligence organizations aside, which have their own methods and means to find out what happened. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence already out there. And we do know that the United States and the Saudis and the Emiratis are funding the MEK right now. Right. They are based in Albania and in Paris. They receive huge amounts of money And they are a terrorist organization. They fought alongside Saddam Hussein. They carried out hundreds of bomb attacks in Iran during the Iran-Iraq War. And they are a cult, and they are funded. So it's not something extraordinary. And we have seen ever since the Trump escalation and the economic war on Iran, we have seen an increase in attacks from Iraqi Kurdistan and also on the Pakistani border. So it is consistent with the broader pattern.
Adam Weinstein, are the Iranians correct in being suspicious and paranoid that perhaps, even though those who carried it out might have been local Iranians, a separatist group within, there might have been foreign hands behind them?
Well, I don't know if they're correct, but certainly the rhetoric coming out of the Gulf feeds into that thinking. I think it's the wrong question. I think the right question is the rhetoric coming out of Saudi Arabia and UAE productive? Is it productive when Mohammed bin Salman says we're going to take the fight into Iran? Is it productive when a senior advisor to the UAE's Mohammed bin Zayed says that this is a policy that's on the table? It certainly feeds into the rhetoric that there's foreign hands interfering in Iran. Whether that's true is anyone's guess.
Alex, Titus, were the Iranians the victims of a terror attack?
I mean, what happened was definitely terrible. We had women and children killed, at least from what we heard from official news reportings. But I think the attack symbolizes something a little bit bigger. I think it symbolizes that there's severe unrest going on in Iran right now between the Iranian people and a regime that is frankly just teetering right now due to the drop in oil prices, due to the sanctions reimposed by the United States. And I think that this really goes to show that the regime doesn't have as strong as a grip on its own country as that it would like to claim to be in the media. Now, of course, the United States has condoned any sort of terrorist attack from taking place. But I mean, I think it's interesting that you hear Rouhani as well as other Iranian officials claim that the U.S. had any sort of act to do with this in Iran. I think this really has to do more with the internal problems with the regime and it failing to actually be held accountable by its own people.
Okay, Mohammad Marandi, stop blaming the United States. Get your own house in order. This is a symptom of severe unrest within the country. Address that.
Well, first of all, then I think the argument, we can extend the argument by saying that the United States is a weak regime that is collapsing from within because the 9/11 attack on New York symbolized the weakness in the country. That's a ridiculous argument to make. This was a terrorist attack near the Iraqi border. Iraq is a country which does not have a lot of control, the central government of what goes on in the country, as we saw in northern Iraq as well. So these are bound to happen. In fact, most of these terrorist attacks are on the borders with countries that have weak central governments, like Pakistan, like northern Iraq. So it has nothing to do with unrest. The turnout for the funeral was, as I said, in the hundreds of thousands in a city which only has a population of 1.5 million people. So actually, I think that what the United States does by supporting terrorist organizations is that they unite the Iranian population. And if the economy is doing very poorly, I think it's because the United States is engaging in economic warfare, and it creates hatred for the United States. But I would add this, that when Giuliani himself says our people are carrying out, are creating unrest in the country, our people in Albania, our people in Paris, he said this specifically, he's very close to the president. When you have all this other circumstantial evidence that I pointed out earlier, and so did your other guests,
right,
what conclusions does one make?
But
from
true,
all
but
that?
would you accept that while they might be working for regime change and funding and doing whatever they deem necessary from their end, it doesn't necessarily mean that they were behind this particular attack? You still need the evidence for that.
Well, of course, but intelligence organizations have their own means. But when when officials in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and one of the closest people to the U.S. president are making such statements, are you going to close your eyes? Are we all going to close our eyes to this very open reality? If an Iranian leader, if someone close to the president said, we were involved in this attack in London or this attack in Paris, or a decision has been made to do this in Germany, there would be outrage. Sure. But there would be outrage in Western. They'd take it to the Security Council. They'd impose sanctions.
And I know there's a bit of a delay here, so sorry for
interrupting. But when it happens in Iran,
no, but certainly, but
then they say, no, this is just...
No, but they didn't claim responsibility for it. What you claimed, or what you highlighted, was Rudy Giuliani saying something that can be interpreted as the United States saying they're going to do stuff to unsettle the Iranian government. What you said is Mohammed bin Salman suggesting that the Saudis want to unsettle Iran and take the fight to Iran. In the aftermath of the attack, the Saudis have said, we didn't do it. They said, we didn't do it. Why don't you believe them?
Of course they're going to say we didn't do it. If they wanted to say that they're going to do it, they'd carry out an open attack. What, do you expect some thief that enters your house after he's been arrested to say that, yes, I did it? He'll try to say I didn't do it. Your readers can decide for themselves. They can look up what Mohammed bin Salman said and see if it's how open it is to interpretation. They can see what the Emirati Crown Prince's advisor said and have interpreted. And they can see what Giuliani said on both occasions, just a couple of days ago and a couple of weeks ago, and then interpret what he has to say. And then they can take what Bolton was saying today, making these threats against Iran, and then interpret all of that. Right. The reality is that these are open threats. These are threats from military threats. But when it comes to Iran, it's all speculation,
okay.
And this is paranoia.
And let me credit you with something.
Conspiracy
Certainly,
theories.
let me credit you with something.
But when it's the other way around,
fair enough.
Everything is...
Fair enough. Let me credit you with that and pose something to Adam here, because Adam, what's interesting is that what clearly happened was you had slaughter of people. Whether you like Iran or not, you had people, slaughtered in a terror attack. In the immediate aftermath, you have the US president not offering any condolences. And in addition to that, just afterwards, at the UN General Assembly, saying that Iran is the leading sponsor of terrorism in the world, right? So when we look at the timing and the optics and the fact that the Iranians are very proud people, is the US president playing with fire here by simply not even doing the optics right after the Iranians suffered a terror attack?
Well, to some extent, and I'd like to push back against a couple points that both guests made, and I think that will answer your question. Number one, there is unrest in Iran, and there certainly is some dissatisfaction, significant dissatisfaction with the regime. But the attacks in Ahvaz are not an example of that. I think we have to remember historically that separatist movements in this region haven't been very powerful. Saudi Arabia was concerned that its Shiite population in the eastern province would join Saddam Hussein during the Iraq War, and they didn't. Iran was concerned that its ethnic Arabs in Khuzestan would possibly join Saddam during the Iran-Iraq War, and it didn't happen. And Saddam Hussein himself was worried that his Shiite population might become loyal to Iran, and that didn't happen during his regime. So the separatist movements in Iran are not very powerful. So this attack, whether it was completely homegrown or whether there was some involvement from some country abroad, doesn't represent, it's not indicative of dissatisfaction with the regime. Other events in Iran might be, but not this one. In terms of it uniting the people of Iran, yes and no. Iranian nationalism transcends different ethnicities, transcends different languages. We have to remember, there's Azaris, Baluch, Lurs, ethnic Arabs, Kurds, and yet Iranian nationalism has traditionally transcended these different ethnic groups, and it transcends the regime itself. The regime right now may see itself as the caretaker of Iranian, the custodian of Iranian nationalism, but Iranians experience nationalism independent of the regime. So these attacks will unite Iranians, even Iranians who are critical of the regime, because they were so heinous and they were so violent. Certainly because of that, the Trump administration is making a mistake if its goal is to reach out to the Iranian people by not condemning these brutal attacks that, like the guest in Tehran said, killed children, killed conscripts, killed veterans. It wasn't so much a military parade as it was a commemorative parade.
Right. Mohammad Marandi, are you unhappy with the lack of Western condolences and sympathy in the aftermath? Nobody saying, or very few people saying, sorry you were attacked?
Well, remember the administration in Iran, they expressed condolences, different administrations, when attacks were carried out in New York, when attacks were carried out in Manchester, when they were carried out in Paris, when they're carried out in Kabul, when they're carried out in Baghdad. Iran always, the administration here, that's in power, they always do so. But in the case of the United States, the regime in Washington under Trump, he has refused to do so. And as I said, the language coming out from Washington is the language of abuse, threats. When you listen to the likes of Trump, Pompeo, and Bolton, you feel like some sort of godfather is speaking and threatening the people around them. I don't think the Americans quite understand that they're not playing smart. They think that through like sheer force and through threats and through aggressive behavior that they'll get what they want. If the administration in Iran, if the Islamic Republic is so unpopular among people, why does the American government have to engage in economic warfare? They want to create despair in the country, to create hardship, to force the people against the current administration that was voted into office. But to imagine that somehow the United States is not the antagonist here. People in Iran definitely dislike Trump immensely. People in Iran are very angry with the way in which Trump is trying his best to make ordinary people suffer. When Giuliani goes on, speaks and says, he seems happy. He gave an example of there's this young man who wants to sell his organs for money, and other people don't have money. It's as if he takes pleasure in suffering. Of course, it's an exaggeration of what happens in Iran. And it's not only Iran that the Americans are engaging in economic warfare. You see the same in Turkey to a lesser degree. But it's disgusting when people in Iran see someone like Giuliani, who's so close to the president, show such pleasure in what he sees as misery in Iran. It shows that something is deeply wrong in the United States. There's a sickness in the U.S. political regime and the establishment and the media that doesn't see this disgusting attitude. Okay. That shows that there's a disease in that. Let
me bring in Alex Titus here. Alex, you're shaking your head in disagreement. Is the context behind all of this American antagonism, as has been suggested by Mohammad Marandi?
Yeah, well, I just want to respond to the idea that the administration hasn't apologized. Are you just going to completely leave out the fact that Iran immediately blamed this attack on the United States and its allies and, quote, said that there would be a large price to pay for not only the United States, but also for Israel? I mean, it's very clear here what the regime is trying to do. They're trying to politicize this attack to essentially blame the U.S., and its allies based on no evidence, by the way, as you stated before.
No one said that. Who said that?
Yeah, the other guest in Tehran did say that. Yes. He said that the United States has not apologized.
I'm the other guest. Who said
Soleimani
that
literally
Israel
said
did
that
it?
today.
I didn't say the United States hasn't apologized.
No, they didn't say that
they
Israel.
didn't express condolences.
That's not correct.
They didn't express condolences, whereas the Iranians did.
Sorry, missed up in language there. But no, they didn't blame Israel for it, but they did say, are you going to let me finish? They did say that Israel will pay a big price for the attack. You can go look that up on any mainstream news station right now.
Misrepresenting
and that's some of the ridiculous rhetoric that has continued to come on. That is some of the ridiculous rhetoric that has continued
official in Iran said that Israel is going to pay for the attack? Which Iranian official said that the Israelis are going to pay for this attack? Name the person. No, he did not.
Right, I don't know if he can't hear me or if he's just refusing
he said nothing about it.
Not to pay attention here.
Do you?
But I mean, this is
just.
I mean, this is continued rhetoric from the regime. You're going to see these people
okay, so let me come in here, right?
continue to blame
Alex,
the United States.
Alex, you feel that they're paranoid and they're blaming everybody. Let me take direct words from President Rouhani. Mohammad Marandi, he vowed a crushing response. So when we look at it, and as we've discussed, we have this Ahvaz group, these Arab separatists who have claimed it, right? And it's quite likely that they might have carried it out. We have Daesh saying we did it as well. Lots of skepticism that Daesh did it. They might just be trying to claim the credit here. And we have suspicion from the supreme leader, from the foreign minister and others that there were foreign hands, whether it's Gulf hands, American hands, and beyond, right? How do you actually enact a crushing response if you don't know who did it, Mohammad Marandi?
Well, first of all, I'd like to repeat that no one in Iran said Israel is going to pay a price for this attack. I mean, Iran considers Israel to be an apartheid regime and all that, but no one said that. And no one said that the Americans should apologize for the attack. But they say that the Saudis and the Emiratis have funded these people, and that the United States is the power that lies behind the Saudis and the Emiratis and their behavior towards Iran. So right now, the Iranian intelligence is busy gathering information. But as I said earlier, the circumstantial evidence is already there. When the Saudi Crown Prince says A, when the advisor to the Crown Prince in the Emirates says B, when Giuliani, the president's confidant, says C and D, then it's not all that difficult to imagine where this is coming from.
Still circumstantial, though. Adam Weinstein, as we wrap up here, there's a Saudi-Iranian Cold War in the region. That's where the fault lines are drawn. They have been drawn for the past few years. Are recent events just going to make this worse?
Well, it's difficult to know whether the threats that have been made by the IRGC or the Iranian government are meant for their domestic audience or whether they are actually going to try to implement them. I certainly think we're at a dangerous juncture in the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and the Trump administration would be wise to try to diffuse that. It has a close relationship with Riyadh. It could try to use intermediaries such as Oman to try to diffuse those tensions. Unfortunately, this very debate that we've had the last 10 minutes is sort of a microcosm of U.S.-Iran relations where we get distracted by semantics, threats that may be empty threats, may be real threats, circumstantial evidence. And I think, at least in the U.S., what we need to focus on is what is an intelligent policy. Certainly making incendiary remarks that make it easier for the Iranian government to blame the U.S. Or its allies for terrorist attacks isn't productive. Certainly, there's no doubt that the rhetoric that comes out of Tehran is rarely productive. But unfortunately, in the last year, the rhetoric that has come out of Washington and Riyadh has been equally unproductive. And terrorism, I mean, it seems a given thing to say that terrorism is not beneficial to anyone, especially terrorism that kills civilians. And I think we're at a very critical point. And if the Trump administration wants to play a productive role, then one step it could take is attempting to diffuse tensions between Saudi Arabia and Iran. It's not taking that path. It's probably won't be seen as an objective intermediary, but other countries such as Oman have demonstrated themselves to be productive intermediaries in the past. And more chaos and proxy war in the Middle East is not beneficial to anyone's security.
Yeah, lots of questions after the attack. Horrendous attack. People still wondering, does this have to do more with the global geopolitics and maybe even ideology and the power struggle in the region, or is it more hand-to-mouth in that particular region of Iran? Is it those local issues that might have driven the impetus for the horrendous attack? Lots of questions. We don't know who did it, but everybody has a big opinion about it for the moment. We'll continue to watch the story closely. For the moment, gentlemen, I have to move on. Mohammad Marandi, Alex Titus, and Adam Weinstein, I thank you very much.